It's a spring night in 2017 on Walthamstow High Street. The shops are shuttered and a lone CCTV camera watches over the quiet road. In the grainy footage, two figures on bicycles glide through the shadows. Moments later, 17-year-old Elijah Dornelli staggers into a nearby shisha cafe, clutching his abdomen. He's been stabbed badly. Within hours, Elijah is dead. Just hours earlier, Elijah had been marching in an anti-knife crime rally in East London, holding a banner that read, "Enough is enough." He was one of hundreds of young people and bereaved mothers calling for peace on the streets. Yet by 11:30 p.m. that same night, Elijah lay bleeding amid rubbish bins at the west end of Walthamstow High Street, the second stabbing fatality in London that weekend. This is the story of Elijah Dornelli's murder, a tragedy that shook Walthamstow, and how it became a flashpoint in a bloody gang feud. It's a story of innocence lost, of a community caught in the crossfire between rival gangs, and of a cycle of violence that continues to haunt London's streets. Walthamstow, in the borough of Waltham Forest, lies in northeast London, a place of working-class families, multicultural communities, and, in recent years, a growing undercurrent of gang violence. By the mid-2010s, one gang in particular had gained influence here: the Mali Boys, also known as Mali Strip. They were an organized street gang born in 2015 after breaking away from a local crew. Centered around the E10 and E17 postcodes of Leighton and Walthamstow, the Mali Boys seized control of the area's drug trade through ruthless violence. A 2018 council report would later describe them as the most business-driven, violent and ruthless gang in Waltham Forest. Unlike older gangs that wore colors or boasted on social media, the Mali Boys kept a low profile, no flashy clothing or public posts, anything that might draw police attention. Their name, Mali, was a nod to the Somali heritage of many founding members, but the group itself was diverse and predominantly male. Their true allegiance was not to any flag or postcode, but to profit and power on the streets. They ran county lines drug networks, reaching far beyond London, and were feared for grooming even children as young as 12 into their ranks. By 2017, the Mali Boys' rise had upset the balance of power in Walthamstow's underworld. Smaller local gangs either aligned with them or became their enemies. One rival group, based around the Priory Court estate and Higham Hill, not far from where Elijah lived, refused to submit. Tensions between the Mali Boys and this Priory Court gang escalated into a bitter turf war. The stakes were high: control of lucrative drug territory and the street reputation that came with it. Into this volatile atmosphere stepped Elijah Dornelli, a local teenager with his whole life ahead of him. Elijah Dornelli was just 17, a slim, energetic teen who loved football and could brighten up any room. He was a student at Kelmscott School in Walthamstow, described by classmates as the guy who lit up the room with his humor and cheeky smile. A GoFundMe page later called him an amazing personality, with a gleaming smile that would lighten the misery of each day. Elijah was not known as a troublemaker at school, but like many youths in Walthamstow, he was aware of the gangs around him. Some of his friends were involved with the Mali Boys, including 18-year-old Hamza ul Haq, a close friend who was fast rising through the gang's ranks. Whether Elijah was formally a Mali Boys member or just a friend on the periphery, the streets didn't care. To rival gang members, Elijah was one of them. In Walthamstow's charged atmosphere, just being associated with the Mali crew could make a teenager a target. Despite the swirl of gang tensions, Elijah tried to do the right thing. On Sunday, May 7, 2017, he spent the afternoon participating in a peace march against knife violence. Alongside mothers who had lost their sons, Elijah walked through East London streets that very day, chanting for an end to the killings. It was a cause close to home. Youth knife crime in London was surging, with 2017 on track to be one of the deadliest years on record. Tragically, that night, Elijah became another statistic in that grim tally. As dusk fell on May 7th, Elijah and a friend wandered along Walthamstow High Street. Unbeknownst to them, two other teenagers, 18-year-olds Ezra Abeka Suarez and Morgan Mockford, were in the area on very dangerous business. These two had come from outside Walthamstow, off their patch, to sell drugs on Mali Boys' territory. It's believed an earlier confrontation sparked between Elijah's group and the outsiders that evening, possibly in the parking lot of a local Lidl supermarket. Harsh words or threats may have been exchanged as both sides sized each other up under the glow of streetlights. Rather than back down, the two young dealers decided to make a violent statement. They armed themselves with knives and waited in ambush. Elijah and his friend had no idea as they walked up the high street that a trap was set for them. Just before 11:30 p.m., as Elijah passed by shops that had long closed for the night, the two figures emerged from the shadows. They struck quickly. Later, a prosecutor would describe how Elijah and his friend were ambushed on the high street. Elijah's friend managed to break free and run for his life as the attackers lunged at them. Elijah tried to dodge the first swing of a blade, but the second attacker was faster. Morgan Mockford plunged a knife deep into Elijah's stomach. The single thrust tore through Elijah's insides, severing his aorta, the body's largest artery. The wound was catastrophic. In an instant, the young man who had been preaching peace just hours ago was fighting for his own life. Adrenaline surged through Elijah, and despite being mortally wounded, he ran, desperate to escape. He made it about 100 yards down the road to the back entrance of a shisha cafe called Arabian Nights, where local youths often hung out. Elijah staggered inside and then collapsed. Witnesses would later recall the horrifying scene. Elijah crumpled on the floor, blood pooling around him. The wound to his belly was so severe that his intestines were visible, a sight of unspeakable violence in the middle of an ordinary cafe. Panicked voices shouted for an ambulance. Strangers tried to comfort Elijah as he faded, telling him to hold on. Paramedics arrived and rushed Elijah to the hospital, but the damage was done. He was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. In the span of a single day, Elijah Dornelli had gone from marching for peace to becoming the latest casualty of London's knife war. Back on the high street, police sealed off the scene. Under the cold glow of street lamps, detectives found a trail of blood leading from the pavement outside into the cafe. They scoured CCTV feeds and soon spotted two suspects fleeing on bicycles northeast up the street. The killers had escaped into the labyrinth of dark streets, but they wouldn't evade justice for long. Within days, police released CCTV images of the two young men wanted for Elijah's murder. Community tip-offs and relentless investigation led to arrests. Ezra Abeka Suarez from Southall in West London and Morgan Mockford, a local Walthamstow youth, were charged with Elijah Dornelli's murder. When their trial began that November at the Old Bailey, chilling details emerged. How the pair had lain in wait to target Elijah, how one stab wound disemboweled the teen, and how Elijah's last actions were to run for help as his life ebbed away. Both defendants denied being murderers. They admitted being there, but each tried to blame the other for the knife thrust. The jury didn't buy their excuses. Eventually, both Abeka Suarez and Mockford were convicted and jailed for life, with minimum terms of around 18-19 years for the cold-blooded killing. But by the time justice was served, the ripple effects of Elijah's death had already spread far beyond that courtroom. In Walthamstow, the immediate aftermath of Elijah's murder was one of shock, grief, and growing fear. Friends and family mourned a young life cut short. At Elijah's school, classmates wept and counselors were brought in, an all-too-familiar ritual in a city where teenage funerals were becoming commonplace. Elijah's death was the 15th knife killing of a young person in the UK in 2017 by that point, and one of several in Waltham Forest alone. The community had already been on edge, but now a new question loomed. Would Elijah's friends seek revenge? Elijah had been a Marley Boys affiliate, effectively family to the gang. His closest friends in the Marley Boys, furious and heartbroken, were not going to let his killing go unanswered. Almost immediately, a vendetta was underway. Police later described how Elijah's murder marked the beginning of an increasingly bloodied and vengeful feud between the Marley Boys and their Higham Hill rivals. Over the next months, tit-for-tat violence exploded across Walthamstow. 2 days after Elijah's death, someone fired shots at a house linked to the rival gang, a warning. That summer, street brawls and chases became common. Then in November 2017, the Marley Boys struck lethally. 18-year-old Katsum Mokrane, believed to be from the Priory Court, Higham Hill side, was cornered and stabbed to death by a group of Mali boys wielding knives. The ambush was orchestrated by none other than Hamza-ul-Haq, Elijah's friend who had now become a ringleader of the Mali boys and was hungry for revenge. Just 2 days before killing Kachem, ul-Haq himself had been targeted in an acid attack, a corrosive liquid hurled in his face by rivals, but he survived and only doubled down on retaliation. In this feud, violence begot violence. No one was safe. One Mali Boys member was stabbed and wounded in the street by a group of Priory Court youths, and the Mali crew, in turn, prowled for any chance to hit back. The cycle of revenge reached a new level in March 2018. Mali Boys gunmen cruising the streets spotted what they thought was a rival. They opened fire on a van, killing 20-year-old Joseph Williams Torres as he sat in the passenger seat. Joseph wasn't even a gang member. He was an innocent young man, misidentified for someone else. The Mali boys' thirst for payback had become so reckless and ruthless that they didn't hesitate to shoot anyone they deemed an enemy. An innocent life was lost due to a careless case of mistaken identity in this war. For the people of Walthamstow, this was terrifying. What started with Elijah's death was now an all-out gang war playing out in their streets. Residents spoke of being afraid to walk outside at night, of teenagers carrying knives because they felt they needed protection. Community meetings were held where anxious parents pleaded for action. Even the local MP, Stella Creasy, publicly mourned the string of youth murders. "In the last 18 months," she said in early 2019, "we have buried 6 children in our community, children killed by other children. The others were Elijah Dornelly, Kachem Mokrane, Joseph Williams Torres." She urged that this national crisis be addressed. Walthamstow's streets, once just everyday city streets, now felt like battlegrounds. Sirens became a nightly soundtrack. Murals and memorials for slain teenagers appeared on walls. The fear and trauma spread well beyond the gangs. It seeped into the fabric of the community. By 2019, the Mali Boys versus Priory Court feud had finally begun to wane after a series of police crackdowns and major convictions. Hamza-ul-Haq and several Mali Boys were arrested, tried, and eventually jailed for life in connection with the revenge murders. The leaders of the rival gang were also pursued by law enforcement. It took dozens of lives ruined or ended, including Elijah's, for authorities to gain the upper hand on this particular gang war. But the legacy of Elijah Dornelly's death runs deeper than a police case file. Elijah's murder became a grim symbol of London's gang crisis, a stark example of how a single act of violence can ignite an inferno of retribution. He was a teenager who tried to stand for peace, yet fell victim to a cycle of vengeance that his death only intensified. In Walthamstow, Elijah's name is now forever linked with a dark chapter, one that residents wish they could forget, but also hope the world will learn from. If any good can be drawn from this tragedy, it's the galvanizing of the community against violence. Elijah's death and the chaos that followed spurred renewed efforts by local activists and officials to intervene in gang recruitment and support at-risk youth. The very march Elijah attended has grown in size each year since, with more young people chanting, "Enough is enough," determined that his fate will not be theirs. In the end, Elijah Dornelly's story is a heartbreaking cautionary tale. It highlights how quickly a life can be stolen on the streets of London, and how that loss can reverberate, triggering further bloodshed. Elijah was one son, one friend, one bright soul whose absence created a void that anger tried to fill with more violence. His murder illustrated the cruel logic of gang warfare, where revenge trumps grief and innocent lives become collateral damage. As London continues to grapple with gang conflicts, Elijah's memory stands as a plea for a different path. It asks, how many more young lives must be lost before the cycle is broken? How many marches must chant, "Enough is enough," before it truly is enough? Elijah Dornelly's death was not the first in this war, and sadly it was not the last. But to those who knew him and to a community that loved him, his story will always matter. A reminder of what is at stake in the battle for London's streets, and of the hope that someday young men like Elijah can grow up without fear, free from the shadow of gang violence.